Hey there, my name is sjofors, and if you know me by now, you also know that I'm known as the Price Whisper. And I'm going to talk about, in this episode, I'm going to talk about how you should think about pricing in your company and some kind of exit strategy. All of us that are company owners, whether we are own the whole thing outright or whether we are shareholders in a company of sort, whether we are operational in the company or just shareholders, investors, still need to think about how pricing and how pricing affects the valuation of the company. Because, of course, sooner or later, you probably want to exit. What that means could be anything depending on your particular company. It could be that you want to sell your company in a trade sale to somebody in your industry. That makes sense. It may be that you want to sell the company to a private equity group or have a large investment from a venture capitalist group or something like that. Or it may even be that you want to go public, right? I On that note, I just sort of found out. I knew this, but it was sort of new information anyway. That out of the roughly 4 million companies in the U.S., only 4,000 are public, and the number of public companies are actually shrinking, and is down from about 6,000 some 10 years ago. So fewer companies goes public. Anyway, and then of course the last possible exit scenario is that maybe you want to bequest your company to your sons and daughters, or other family members maybe. And in all of these instances, what you do with pricing affects how you can do that exit, how you can successfully do that exit. Of course, that's what I meant. Now, what do I mean with success here? Well, every company is out there to provide value to our clients, right? If we don't provide value to our clients, we eventually have no company. And the value to our clients obviously is related to the prices that we charge. And often the more value you can deliver, the higher prices you can charge. And value, though, is something that is perceived value. It's often very hard to really understand the value that you give to a company in terms of true monetary, or the value you give to a customer of yours in true monetary value. And on that note, I remember reading an interview with the CEO of Rolex, the Swiss watch company, and he was asked to make a statement about the state of the Swiss watch industry, and to which his answer was, "I don't know. We are not in the watch industry." And so what I mean with that, of course, is that people buy Rolexes for all different reasons, and they don't buy them to keep track of time, right? So the value that Rolex provides and many of the other very high-end watchmakers have nothing to do with timekeeping, and everything to do with image, with patting yourself on the back, or if you gift this, to pat somebody else on the back, and so forth. So has nothing to do with timekeeping anyway. And when it comes to prices, it really is to understand how that perceived value, that your buyers will have when they buy from you, whether it's a product or a service. It does have a perceived value, and it's really about understanding how that perceived value affects their willingness to pay. And this is so important because when you look at the perception of value and willingness to pay, it really means that if you can increase that perceived value, the willingness to pay goes up. And when willingness to pay goes up, it means you can charge higher prices, right? And with higher prices often comes higher profitability. And with higher profitability comes resources to grow your business quicker. So it becomes a reinforcing cycle. And when it comes to exit, the one thing you want to think about obviously is valuation. And valuation, there's sort of rules of thumbs within the company valuation. There's a little cottage industry of companies who put values on companies, and what affects that value is, of course, things like the current revenue, the current profitability. The growth prospects that the company have, and the most recent years prospects, or not prospect, but actual growth. So the growth rate, and this is where pricing comes in, because once you can adjust your prices to that perception of value. What happens is that your growth is going to increase. It's going to increase dramatically. Your sales growth are going to more than double, right? And your profitability is going to go up. Sometimes in some cases with up to 100%, but more realistically between 25 and 40%. So you have an opportunity here to very quickly increase the valuation of your company with about 3 to 5 times the original valuation. And you do this by adjusting your prices to the perception of value that your marketplace has. Now, how do you find the perception of value? Well, you do willingness to pay research. And willingness to pay research is a very specific way of doing market research from which you can accurately predict sales volume and revenue at different prices. And willingness to pay research will also tell you how your whole go-to-market strategy is aligned with what your market wants to see or not, or if it needs adjustment in any way. And obviously, if it needs adjustment, you can do the appropriate adjustment and consequently enjoy, like I said, higher sales growth, higher margins, and much higher valuation. And this can be done very, very quickly. A couple of examples of recent customers. One company we worked with in February this year, we took their revenues from 200 to about 250 million in 3 weeks, just by doing willingness to pay research and adjusting pricing accordingly. Another example, company we worked with in April, took them, much smaller company, took them from about 15 million to 35 million in 6 weeks. Also because they were simply leaving money on the table. They had a notion of what their prices should be that had no relevance with their market's willingness to pay, right? So they were very underpriced. And as you're thinking about an exit, and again, it could be any of the above, whether you want to do a trade sale, whether you want to sell your company to a private equity group, or do even do an IPO. The going through that process of rapidly increasing sales growth, rapidly increasing profitability is going to make a huge difference for when you sell the company, for the valuation of the company, and that's the whole point with doing a trade sale, of course. And again, if you plan to give the company or bequest the company to family, this will be, I mean, you want to give your family the best you can. The best in terms of business performance, the best in terms of business valuation, and so forth. So conducting this willingness to pay research and do the appropriate adjustment as the research will tell you is the absolutely quickest way to increase company valuation, and it increases company valuation with the highest amount as well. So there's really no time to wait if an exit is somewhere in your not too distant future. And what I'm saying here is that you probably want to do one of these willingness to pay research projects about a year, maybe a year and a half prior to that planned exit, so that the potential buyer can see two things: that you've recently very rapidly increased the business results for your business, and secondly that business result is sustainable and that the growth rate continues, which it will do, because with the added profitability, you have more resource for sales and marketing and product development and so forth. So it all becomes a good thing. And I know that many business owners who say now it's time to exit, they're in a hurry. But my strong suggestion is wait, do the right thing, make sure you have maximize the valuation of your company, and be a little bit patient. Because it's gonna certainly be worth it, So anyway, that was it for today. I want to thank you so much for your time, and I hope you found this a little bit interesting, and so forth. And I will leave you with one message, right? I mentioned about Rolex and the CEO, and he said they were not in the watch industry. So think about that in the context of your business. What business are you in, as opposed to the business that you may think you are in? So again, thank you, and see you next time. Bye.